Sometimes bad stuff happens, even to the greats, the Ritz-Carltons, the Amazons, the Apples of the world. Sometimes things go south, and there's a customer experience failure. But what makes these companies different is they recognize that they need not resign themselves in the face of a failure like that to creating a brand terrorist or even a dissatisfied customer. What they recognize is that if they overcorrect on the recovery, if they knock the ball out of the park on the recovery, that they can actually create a peak in the experience that eclipses the negativity of the failure itself. And it's been shown in studies that if you do this well, you sometimes can actually create a more loyal customer after the failure and recovery than you had before. So the story I'm going to tell you to illustrate this, I like to leave it for last because not only does it illustrate this principle, it actually illustrates some of the others we've talked about, things like advocacy, stirring emotion. And I can tell you this is a true story because it happened to me. It's a personal story. And it goes back to when I was an executive at a Fortune 100 insurance company. This company, like I'm sure you're familiar with, some of your companies probably do it, each year they'd hold a big event for their top performing producers. And it was a really big deal. This one was being held at the Ritz-Carlton in Naples, Florida. The CEO was going to be there. The board of directors was going to be there. They had arranged a black tie formal dinner for one night of the event. With black tie dinners, for guys it's easy. If you own a tux, you take it out of the closet. If you don't, you rent one. But for women, it's a lot more difficult. And my wife was actually accompanying me on the trip, and so she was stressing for weeks before, trying to find the perfect formal evening gown to wear to this black tie event. And she finally found something, and she bought it. She bought this dress. She bought accessories and some shoes to go with it. She came home. She was so excited she was going to look beautiful at the black tie dinner. So the time came for the conference. We flew down from Connecticut, where we live, down to Naples, Florida. And we're unpacking our bags in our hotel room. And my wife discovers that her formal evening gown got all wrinkled in transit. So she sends it out to the Ritz-Carlton dry cleaning service. Well, it comes back the next day, and I kid you not, it's the size of a Barbie doll. Now, I am not a woman, but to hear my wife tell this story, this is the doomsday scenario. It does not get worse than this. This is even worse than showing up at the event and seeing somebody wearing the same dress. Because the event is just a few days away, and my wife has absolutely nothing to wear now, and she is freaking out with a capital F. So I call down to the Ritz-Carlton front desk, and I ask to speak to the hotel manager. He gets on the phone, and I explain to him the situation. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, "Mr. Picoult, I am going to take care of this for you." Now let's just pause there for a moment. How often is it when interacting with a business that you hear somebody take that level of ownership? Utter those words. Not just utter those words, but mean those words. Not just mean those words, but deliver on those words. But boy, did he deliver, because the next thing I know, he had arranged for a limo to pick up my wife and to take her to the local high-end shopping mall in Naples, where there were stores like Neiman Marcus, Saks, Nordstrom. And they had arranged for a personal shopper to greet her at every store, spend as much time as she needed to find a new formal evening gown. She was out all day. She finally found a gown she fell in love with at Nordstrom. She bought it. She bought some shoes and accessories to go with it. She came home, and she came back to the hotel room, and she was just thrilled. She felt so much better. She was excited for the event again. She was going to look beautiful. Here's the kicker. Ritz-Carlton paid for the whole thing. They paid for the limo to take her to the shopping malls. They paid for the dress, the accessories, the shoes. They paid for it all. Pretty impressive service recovery, right? Wait, it gets better. So it's the night of the event. The event starts at 6 o'clock. We're in our room. It's about 5 o'clock. I'm getting dressed on this side of the room. My wife's getting dressed on the other side of the room. I'm putting on my tux. Suddenly I hear an audible gasp from the other side of the room. I go over to my wife and I say, "Rebecca, what's the matter?" She points down to the bottom of her evening gown and says, "John, Nordstrom forgot to remove the anti-shoplifting ink cartridge. It's still on the dress." Well, quick-thinking husband that I am, I said to her, "Oh, Becca, don't worry about it. Nobody will notice it." She didn't buy that. She didn't buy that. So what do? I pick up the phone, I call to the front desk, I ask to speak to the Ritz-Carlton hotel manager. He gets on the line, I tell him what's going on. What does he say to me? "Mr. Picoult, I am going to take care of this for you." 20 minutes later, there's a knock at our hotel room door. I open it up. It's the Ritz-Carlton hotel manager, and there beside him is the Nordstrom employee who he summoned from the store with the ink cartridge removal device. The Nordstrom employee kneels down before my wife, clips off the ink cartridge. There's no hole in her dress. There's no ink spillage. We've got 20 minutes to spare. Pretty cool service recovery, wouldn't you say? Wait, it gets better. We go down to the event. It starts at 6. We're there a few minutes early. We find our table seating assignment, and we go and we sit down at our table. And I have my head down looking at the menu, deciding what I'm going to order that evening, and suddenly I hear clapping. And I look up, and there at the end of the table is the Ritz-Carlton hotel manager and members of his staff, clapping, applauding in admiration of how beautiful my wife looks. It was like that scene from the movie Pretty Woman. Do you remember that? Julia Roberts had to get an evening gown for Richard Gere's event, and she went out, she came back to the hotel, and the hotel manager was there giving her a standing ovation with his staff. That actually happened to me and my wife. Pretty cool service recovery, right? That's the end of the story. It doesn't get better than that. But I don't just want this to be an entertaining tale for you. Here's what I want you to take away from it. I want you to think about what was going through the head of that Ritz-Carlton hotel manager. Because at some point in this process, he ceased to focus on the mechanics of the experience, the mechanics of the recovery. How do I fix Mrs. Picoult's dress? Or how do I get her a new one? At some point, he stopped focusing on that, and he started to focus on something along the lines of this. In light of the circumstances, how do I make Mr. and Mrs. Picoult feel special? And that must be when he came up with this brilliant idea to go down to the event with his staff and to give my wife a standing ovation. And it was sheer brilliance, because by virtue of doing that, he made sure that wherever in the world I go and I tell this story, I'm telling a story not about how Ritz-Carlton shrunk my wife's evening gown to the size of a Barbie doll. I'm telling a story about how Ritz-Carlton engineered the greatest service recovery in the history of the world. And I just add to the aura and legend around Ritz-Carlton. But here is my counsel to you. My counsel to you is that any day of the week, you and your colleagues can embrace the same approach as this Ritz-Carlton hotel manager, focusing not just on the mechanics of the experience you're delivering, but also thinking in terms of, how do I make my customer feel special? It makes all the difference.